Hello, this is Ivona Jedalak, recording for our real estate podcast. Today's topic is common mistakes made when selling a small apartment building. By small, we mean 2 to 3 units and many times owner occupied. But sometimes only tenant occupied, which in many cases makes things even worse because if the owner's not there, the tenants kind of run the place because they've been left alone for so long and everything was up to them that now they feel like the place is theirs. And I'm going to turn things over to my partner, Gary Daly.
Hi, I'm Gary Daly, broker owner of House Coast Real Estate. And yeah, just to expound a little bit on what Ivona said, there's a list in no particular order of things that do come up when you're trying to sell an apartment building. It'll cause a lot of problems. One of the main ones we've run into is seller feels guilty, which is kind of odd to me, but they feel guilty about selling their building. So the first thing they're thinking of is they want to protect their tenants and they want to sign them up all to long-term leases before they put the building on the market. That's a big no-no. A lot of times a smaller building is going to be a family-occupied unit, and a lot of times families buying it. If it's a 3-unit, it's not unusual that there's going to be family members living in the whole building on all 3 separate floors. And when they see long-term leases, no interest in buying it because they may be renting somewhere and they finally don't want to be renters anymore. They want to be owners, and they're going to be an owner, but yet they can't occupy the building. Now, they're willing to wait a couple months, 2-3 months, but please do not sign them up for a year in advance or more because that's just going to be a total killer when it comes around to us trying to sell your building. It's just not a good thing to do. The second thing I would say is, and this doesn't, not trying to be negative, this wouldn't be all buildings, but sometimes you may have your troublemaking tenants, and because you don't live there, and maybe they're paying late, other tenants complain about their noise, stuff like that, and you kind of tolerate it because you don't live there and you don't want to have an empty unit. Well, that troublemaking tenant usually really becomes a pain when you're trying to sell the building because what do they want? They want to stay, and they don't want any change. So a lot of times they'll be not letting us in to show the unit, setting up an appointment to show the unit, and then we show up and they're not there, and then they're like, oh, sorry, we forgot. Come to the place and there's underwear and clothes all over the floor, dishes all in the sink. They're purposely doing things to sabotage us being able to effectively sell the building. Because if it looks that bad and they got 3 or 4 months left on the lease, the buyer's going to be definitely afraid if they close that they're going to be stuck with this person and it's not going to be easy to get rid of them. So rule number 2, make sure if you have any problem tenant, if it's possible, either have them out before you sell, or if their lease is running out, do not renew their lease, which goes back to point number 1. And I'm going to have Ivona take over for the next one.
Well, we had tenants jeopardize the seller's sale by collecting garbage in their apartment, like bags of it. They've never done it before. They were very clean, actually. And then all of a sudden, the building is up for sale and there is bags of garbage. So not only that there's bags of garbage, there's bad smell, especially if it's warm and it's summer. And with that, we also advise you not to rehab the entire building, but maybe at least take care of some deferred maintenance. Because if you're not living there, things just kind of get, it's nothing major, but get the staircase really cleaned, carpet steamed if you have to, get it painted, and just the small things, but it just makes such a big difference, especially if the rest of the building is nice, remodeled kitchens, remodeled baths, but the common areas, one tenant moved, another moved out, there are some nicks in the walls. It really pays off big time to have those things taken care of. And I am going to start on another topic, which is not raising, topic is the same, but not raising your tenants' rents. If not every year, we find it that every year is probably the best because then you can raise it by, let's say, $30 $35. Everything goes up. Your taxes definitely go up in Chicago every year. So if you raise it in little increments, it's going to help you out. The tenant's not going to move out for $30 most of the time. And everything stays done right. But if you don't raise a rent of a good tenant because you're afraid of them leaving and you don't want to be painting and redecorating and they're there for 5 years, all of a sudden their rent is $200 or under market, and that is going to affect your bottom line, especially if you also sign your tenant to a new lease, because then their new owner is stuck with that tenant paying low rent for another 9 months or a year or however long have you. And talking about trouble making tenants, we have many times our sellers tell us how their tenants love them. And no one should assume that the tenant loves you and you find out that they don't. As soon as you go on the market, then everything changes. And some people are very understanding. Some tenants are very understanding, and they understand they rent, they understand the inconvenience, and they go along with it. We are very good with giving people a long notice. We also show up for every showing, so your tenants are not exposed to every time there's a new agent. At least they see us, they know us. We're always there, going from room to room, so no one takes anything, and that's usually not a problem. With all the years we've been in the business, nothing really disappears, but it just makes the tenants feel safer because they know who we are. But don't assume as a seller that your tenants will love you after you put your building on the market as much as they loved you beforehand. And recently, one of our clients found out the hard way. Unfortunately, the hard way also affected us when their tenant, who was a very good tenant, all of a sudden started to be a trouble tenant, said no to basically everything. Gary, you dealt with him more than I did. So
basically, so in Chicago, you have to give tenants at least 48-hour notice prior to coming in. Now, if you give them a day and a half, someone's not turning and looking at their watch and saying, "Oh, you're a half hour short of 48 hours. I'm not letting you in." Well, this guy was that guy. If it was 15 minutes short of 48 hours, he wasn't going to let us in. He had his supposed attorney call me on the phone. I don't even know if he's an attorney or he's a dishwasher, whatever he was. And he's telling me how they're going to be going to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. And I'm like, for what? He goes, because you can't go in and show it. You're breaking the law. And I'm like, I'm not breaking the law. I'm giving him proper 48-hour notice. If I give him 48-hour notice, I'm not breaking the law. I can show it. I have a key. I'm going to go in. Well, he was ex-military and was doing something for the government, God only knows what. And one of the times he did relent and let us in. And we came in, and he's standing at the top of the stairs wearing some kind of police vest. I'm not saying he was police, it's just that's what it said on the vest. He had 2 guns strapped on each side of him, had another gun strapped across his chest with his police hat on and dark sunglasses, and he was just staring at us playing very loud music as we went and took a look at the building. So it was very odd. And when I saw him, I said, "Oh, you just back from a mission?" And he just gave me a look and didn't say anything. And when we left, the buyers and their agent was like, "What the hell is that?" So thank God, I have to thank the military, contacted him, I guess, 2 months later, and he had to break his lease early, which my seller was glad to let him do. And he moved. And as soon as he moved and we had an empty apartment, we sold the building about 3 weeks later, which goes back to a lot of times if you're getting a lease ready to end and you're ready to put it on the market, not a bad thing. Leave it empty. Usually causes the building to sell quicker because an owner is going to live in it, sees that there's a unit they can get into right away. So we kind of owe that sale to the U.S. military for getting this guy out.
yeah, I definitely, because if I was the buyer and a guy who lifts weights half the day, probably, that's what he looked like. I saw him a couple of times too. And he's standing there strapped with 3 guns. I I'm not buying that building. Like, this is already bad news for me because you're not letting us in, really. He stayed on top of you guys too, right? Followed you.
right on our shoulder.
Yeah. So, we told him that he can stay. It's his apartment, not a problem. However, I don't think anybody would feel comfortable with an armed man following you into every room and the kitchen, and while you're looking at the bathroom. But usually it's not that bad. Usually we don't have armed people standing at the door. However, many tenants did jeopardize our sales by telling stories that there's mice, that it's very cold in the winter, even though the building has new windows or replaced windows, and they control their own heat. So, if you're cold, turn the heat up, I guess, or close the windows in winter. But people will follow the buyers and tell him these stories that no one's asking for. And the funny thing is that this was never an issue for them when the building was not for sale.
Right.
They were never called. But what is the buyer to think? Why is this person telling me these stories? Unless you have a lot of experience, you're gonna start thinking this person is telling you the truth. And one lady was telling our buyers how there's mice. And yes, I don't doubt that in 8 years of her living there, maybe once she had mice,
Right.
which were eradicated. But it wasn't yesterday. It wasn't happening right now. Yet every time she was home for the showing, that's what she would tell every buyer, potential buyer.
And she was telling people how the light fixtures didn't work, and I went and brought some light bulbs and unscrewed the cover and put them in. And they said, "Oh, it works. It's magic."
Yes.
Light bulbs don't last forever.
So her light bulbs were burned out, which is very typical for tenants. And this is another good piece of advice, that if you are the seller, obviously you're not going to be changing your tenants' light bulbs. That is not, that's just a part of regular maintenance. That is not regular maintenance. This is something the tenant, it's wear and tear, regular wear and tear, and tenants are putting in new light bulbs. However, when you're selling and your tenant has 5 light bulbs burned out in the dining room and only one working because they don't care, that is probably a good time to buy some light bulbs and simply put them in while you're selling, so the rooms are nice and bright. And
as a landlord, you could do a little punch list when you go through the units. You got a fan that's wobbling, that's ready to fall off. The weights are probably missing. You fix that. Light bulbs, make sure all the light bulbs are available, yes. Exhaust fan in the bathroom maybe doesn't work. You just make sure that works. This is the little stuff. So that way when a buyer is coming through, they have some sense of that you have pride of ownership in the building, as they're seeing all these things do function and work. So it's just kind of staying on top of your building, and especially when you're going to be selling it, just to kind of, like I said, go through with a punch list and make sure everything's lit up, everything that closes is supposed to close, everything that opens is supposed to open. Your furnaces are functioning properly, your stoves, all the burners light up, and if they're dirty, you have to have them clean them.
Very important, especially if the stove belongs to the owner, and most of the time it does. When a lot of buildings are selling with FHA loans, and those are great, really. There's now plastic windows, so there's not much peeling paint, but very often the burners on the stove are not working, and part of when the appraiser comes out, they do always check if all 4 burners are working, and they take pictures of it. That's a part of their job, and it's very, very important. So you don't want your sale hung up, and you're going to be now running around buying a new stove, desperately looking for it, having the appraiser they have to come back. There's an extra charge for it. It's one of the requirements of FHA that your stove has to be in working order.
Yes.
And they check that.
And GFI outlets within 6 feet of any water source, City Chicago code, that you have to have GFI outlets anywhere within 6 feet of any water source. And that's just a simple City of Chicago code issue. So if you don't have it and you don't do it and you sell the building and they get a professional home inspector, which 99 times out of 100 they're going to do, you're going to get flagged for it. Now, it's not a huge deal, but you'll have to replace them, and the appraiser has to come back, or we have to take pictures and send pictures to the appraiser to show that the GFIs are in prior to them fully approving them for the loan. So these are just some of the items, that are involved when you're selling an income property.
Some, yes.
Yeah, so some.
There's obviously every building is different, and these are issues that come up the most, especially if sellers own the building for a long time and they have it paid off or closely to paid off, because then they're able to give their tenants a rent break, and they want to keep a good tenant for a long time because they've had enough of the bad ones who don't pay or destroy the place. So once you get somebody, you just don't want to raise their rent. But every building is different, and if you are interested in having your building sold and you're in the Chicagoland area or Chicago, have us over, and we look at everything and go case by case, because even though there's similarities, every building is different, and we give different advice to every seller out there.
But we have a basic punch list that we would go through with you in the beginning. It's usually minor stuff, but that way there's no hidden surprises, and you're going to show to the maximum level of being a very complete, well-maintained, clean building that people will like, and most importantly, that they'll pay top market value for.
Okay, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.